I'm afraid for you to go there, because that is what Christians have been doing forever, hiding behind the spiritual values. So come to church and praise and pray God, and you leave as hungry as you came in, as naked as you came in, as homeless as you came in. But pray and trust God, because there's a better world coming in the land by and by.
And avoid the real immediate needs that exist.
Yes. And that is why this quarter we want to kind of remove the kind of spirituality and stuff from this and make it practical, because Jesus was practical.
Yeah.
When the people were hearing him preach, remember, he was preaching and they were with him for about 3 days. Do you know who it was that realized the people were hungry? It wasn't the people who were saying it. It was Jesus himself who said, you know, these people should be hungry by now. That says something about Jesus Christ.
It was sensitive. It was aware.
Yeah. And he provided not spiritual bread for them, but physical bread, real bread to sustain their bodies. It was Jesus Christ who recognized that they were hungry. When he went to the wedding of Cana and they were out of wine, he could have simply said, you know, the wine of the word or something like that. He says, no, I will give them wine, and even better quality, because they're having fun. This is a wedding. How can you have a wedding without wine? And he provides it. So as we go through this quarter and this season, it will be to challenge all of us to step out of that spiritual cubicle that we've been in, hiding from the world, and to engage with the least of these, engage with the people we meet daily.
Pastor, there's another time where we are setting out on a journey into another season that is always exciting, because this is opening another chapter of these grand themes that we get to explore in this podcast.
That is so true.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of the sermon you preached, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and one of the statements you say there, that in the final judgment, in the final assessment of our lives, God will not say, well said,
true,
or well preached.
No.
He's going to say, well done.
Well done.
And the basis of that is Matthew 25. And it's really speaking to how we have interacted with those who are less fortunate, those who have not had the kind of access, the kind of privilege, the kind of abundance that those who are doing well have had the chance to enjoy. And Pastor, when you even think of the world today, in fact, part of the case that is made by the Bernie Sanders of the world, that people are now pushing us towards a more socialist kind of economy, is that over 90% of the wealth of the world is in the hands of people who are less than 0.1% of the population.
Is it that low?
Yes.
Wow.
Very few people on the largest portion of the land. So there is real disparity and real disproportionate distribution of wealth. And I think as believers, the one thing we bring into the culture, into the society, is this idea that everyone has value and bears this image of God and deserves to be seen as worth being lifted up, to also have dignity and to enjoy what is good in the world.
So are you implying that a very major part of the way God judges us will be in relation to how we treat the poor and needy? That will be a big part of God's well done or not?
Yes.
Not about keeping the 10 Commandments, not about some of the other things we do?
No, and I think, in fact, when you really press into what it means to even keep the 10 Commandments, at the core of it is really this proper engagement with your neighbor, even as you reflect that image of God in your lived life.
So in a sense, you're saying the Good Samaritan that Jesus told the guy, go and do likewise. And he wasn't a Jew going to the temple and doing all the religious things, yet Jesus uses him as an example for the religious people to follow. Isn't that kind of ironic?
Yeah, and even in Jesus' ministry, in fact, that's a good point to make, because parable after parable and an example of example, Jesus seems to be speaking to this, how people should take care of these disparities, those who have less, those who are not fortunate. And even the people Jesus associated with were rarely the well-to-do, even as he did associate with those, but rarely, in very limited cases.
In fact, they say that over 2,000 times in the scriptures, over 2,000 verses, we see God showing concern for the poor and the needy, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. That's a word that is not very well liked in America these days. The foreigner,
The outsider.
the outsider, the immigrant. It is as though God keeps reminding his people and reminding the poor, I do care about you. And so Jesus says when the Son of Man comes in all his glory in Matthew chapter 25, he would put the sheep on one side and
The goats on the other.
on the other side.
Yeah.
And he will tell the goats,
Go your way.
get away from me, I never knew you. And they would say, why? Why? He said, because I was sick, I was hungry, I was imprisoned, I was naked, and you never ministered to my needs. But the sheep, on the other hand, he says, come, blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you. Because again, I was sick, I was naked, I was in prison, and you came and you ministered to me. I was naked and you came and you ministered to me. And then the sheep or the righteous ones, they are surprised. Because they said, Lord, we never saw you sick in prison or naked or anything like that and minister to you. And Jesus' words are words that should ring in our hearts and be a trumpet blasting in our ears. Inasmuch as you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren.
You did it to me.
Yeah. Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least, you did it to me. So this quarter, in this season, Joel, we'll be looking at the least of these. The Christian's attitude towards the poor, the suffering, and the needy. What should be a Christian's attitude? And how can we, in all practicality, minister to the poor, the suffering, and the needy?
And it's very interesting when the language Paul uses in speaking of Christ's ministry. He says in 2 Corinthians 8:9, you know the generous grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich.
Yes. Christ identified with the poor and the needy and the suffering. And in giving up his wealth, his power, and identifying with the poor and needy, he transfers to the poor and needy that sense of value. And eventually, they will receive, as Jesus says, no one who leaves father or mother for me will not in this world receive, and then in the world to come will also receive.
Yeah, and Pastor, what I even think that is interesting in this very statement is that for us, when we conceptualize of wealth, of richness, of having plenty, it's all in material things. It's all in those things that are the world offers or that we make of the world. But Jesus is saying that he became poor in those things that are even more necessary for our well-being, and gave himself so that we could be rich in those things.
You mean the spiritual value?
Yes, the spiritual value. And I think it really reflects on the depth of how much poor he had to become.
I know where you're going with this, Joel, and it's a good place to go, but I'm afraid for you to go there. Do you know why I'm afraid? I'm afraid for you to go there because that is what Christians have been doing forever, hiding behind the spiritual values. So come to church and praise and pray God, and you leave as hungry as you came in, as naked as you came in, as homeless as you came in. But pray and trust God because there's a better world coming in the land by and by.
And avoid the real immediate needs that exist.
Yes. And that is why this quarter we want to kind of remove the kind of spirituality and stuff from this and make it practical, because Jesus was practical.
Yeah.
When the people were hearing him preach, remember, he was preaching and they were with him for about 3 days. Do you know who it was that realized the people were hungry? It wasn't the people who were saying it. It was Jesus himself who said, these people should be hungry by now. That says something about Jesus Christ.
He was sensitive. He was aware.
Yeah. And he provided not spiritual bread for them, but physical bread, real bread to sustain their bodies. It was Jesus Christ who recognized that they were hungry. When he went to the wedding of Cana and they were out of wine, he could have simply said, the wine of the word or something like that. He says, no, I will give them wine and even better quality because they're having fun. This is a wedding. How can you have a wedding without wine? And he provides it. So as we go through this quarter and this season, it will be to challenge all of us to step out of that spiritual cubicle that we've been in, hiding from the world, and to engage with the least of these, engage with the people we meet daily. And why? Well, because the Bible says in the beginning God did what?
Created
the heavens and the earth. And when he was finished creating everything, the Bible says, and behold, it was all good. But in the midst, not in the midst, but at almost at the end of that creation, after he had created the world, the physical structure, the trees and the birds and the seas, everything, he said something interesting to his companions, He said, let us do what?
Make man.
How?
In our own image.
And after our likeness. And let him have
dominion. Right.
Over the trees and the fish and over everything. And then when we look in Genesis chapter 2, it is broken down now even more, because it says God took man and planted him in a garden and told him, take care of it. Name the animals, etc. Take care of the garden. This is your living space. This is your life work. Take care of the garden. So in this beautiful setting, where the man had a job, he had a home, he had a means to sustain himself, this was, I believe, was God's ultimate plan. Wouldn't you say that this was God's ultimate plan?
Yeah.
So in God's blueprint for this world, was there sickness and death and pain and suffering?
No.
So what happened?
I mean, in Genesis 4, sin enters the world, and it brings this distortion of that whole image-bearing exercise and the parity that existed between the created beings.
Yes. And sometimes when we say sin, again, sin is one of those words that could mean so many things.
It fudges. It just is so. It becomes abstract.
Yeah, very abstract.
It gets lost in translation.
This thing, sin. But simply, man decided to trade God's word and trust in God for what he could see and what would sustain him physically. So Eve saw the fruit. It was good for food. It was good to eat. It was something to be desired. So most of us, as we said in the last episode of the last season, one of the things that is killing our society today is that we are in this crazy race to gain things, to earn things, to give us value that we already have. So if I don't have a newer iPhone that when it just came out, if I don't have an iPhone 9 or whatever, where are we now with iPhones? Is it iPhone 9?
Must have gone over 10 now, probably.
Yeah, I don't even try to keep up. Then I'm nobody. If I can't buy me a brand new car with all the bells and whistles, I'm nobody. Sort of like what Satan told to Eve, He said, if you really want to be like a god, you need to eat this. But she didn't become a god. She became a slave. And in that turmoil of selfishness that took reign in her heart and took reign in Adam's heart, where they were now pointing the finger, accusing each other, the dynamics of the earth changed. And by the time God sends Adam and Eve out of the garden, and they have a family who begin to grow up, we come to Cain and Abel. And do you remember what Cain did to Abel?
Killed.
Yes.
Killed Abel. And so, Pastor, interesting even as you lay out this story, because at the core of this change in the dynamic after sin enters that picture is this relational integrity. It seems to me that before sin comes in, there is this sense to care for the other, to look out for the other. But then after sin comes in, it inserts in us this desire to just look out for ourselves and what's good for us.
That is so beautiful that you said that, Joel, because that is at the root of the suffering in the world today. As you mentioned, 0.1% of the world's population possess how much?
Over 90% of the world's wealth.
Resources and wealth. I mean, that is absurd. That is obscene. And what that is telling me is there are people who are able to throw away food every day, while there are so many millions who don't eat every day. Sometimes when I go to some of these primary schools here in America, it grieves my heart. As one who has traveled to other parts of the world, we have seen poverty and suffering. These kids get the milk and the sandwich and stuff, and they may sip it and then throw it away. Oh, I want corn crisps. I want cornflakes today. No, I want cherry oats. Eat these today. choices beyond choices. Have you ever been to the supermarket lately?
Yes.
Choice upon choice. You're confused just to have breakfast. And while we are here deciding between Honey Nut Cheerios and Captain Crunch, junk anyway, there's a kid who hasn't eaten for 3 days, who would eat anything that was put before him. That's how obscene it is. Why? Because of that disequilibrium that came, that selfishness, that I'm looking out
for myself.
For me.
And maybe, Pastor, then let's stick there for a minute, because I'm sure there are many listeners who will be like, as they think through what we are sharing here, be saying, what does that mean for me? Should I not go to the supermarket and buy these things? Should I not buy something good for myself? Should I not do something to reward my hard work or to also fit into the society I find myself? How do I balance the reality of me striving to enjoy what is in this space, in this environment, in this culture, versus caring for those people who are suffering in different parts, in different places?
The idea is not for us to bear the whole burden of the world. There was one who already did that, Jesus Christ. But we should bear each other's burdens, those around us.
And maybe the challenge is, Pastor, we have not surrounded ourselves with poor people. We have not surrounded ourselves with people who are suffering. So we don't get to see the suffering, and it's something that is obscure to us even as we speak about it. Who are these people? Where are they? How can I reach them? As an individual, maybe, I can send some money to the World Health Organization or to the World Food Program. But as an individual, how do I access constantly poor people and be empathize with them and be in that space of thinking about them constantly?
And again, I'm not even sure we need to be thinking about them continuously, because then we won't be able to even enjoy the things we have, because we begin to feel guilty. That is why when remember Mary when she broke the ointment of Jesus' feet, and Judas said, that could have been sold and money given to the poor. And Jesus didn't say, no, that's really true. He said, no, the poor you will always have with you, but you won't have me always with you. So I am glad you brought up that point, because we are not saying we should all just become hermits, become Mother Teresa's, which is not a bad idea anyway. We're not telling anyone to give up their comfort or their means of sustenance, having a lovely home, a lovely car. We're not telling people to do that. The poor you will always have with you, and you could burn yourself out trying to deal with all the poverty around you. So when Jesus accepted this show of love by this expensive perfume being used to anoint him, he's saying we also need to show our loved ones we appreciate them by giving them some of the finer things that we can. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So it is not right to deny your son a beautiful bike for his birthday, let's say, where he could ride and have fun. Jesus says, no, you won't always have this son as a child to run and play. So let him enjoy what you can afford to give him. Yet, within that context of being willing to lavish on your loved ones gifts and presents and that kind of stuff, I'm saying don't forget the poor and needy. Don't be excessive and wasteful.
And maybe
resources I've given you.
Right there is where now we need to really create a very clear picture for our listeners, because I think modesty is really what, at least in terms of our wealth, and now we say that, in our age, modesty is not about wealth, but modesty in terms of wealth is really something now we should be thinking a lot more about, because it's not bad owning a good car, but when you own 4-5 good cars, that's something different.
That is totally different. Totally different. Therefore, on the one hand, we are stewards. God told Adam and Eve, he says, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion. He's given them authority to exploit the resources of the earth for their own well-being and all of that. But it wasn't just to be for your family or your family. It was to be shared by all men, because all men coming from Adam were made in
God's image.
Yeah. And therefore, I like the way Luke puts it when he gives the genealogy of Jesus. He goes back, and then he says, Adam, the son of God. Then Paul in Acts chapter 17 says, we are all made of one blood to dwell on the earth. That tells me, therefore, every human being has value in the sight of God because we share our common humanity. I may be an African, I may be a Chinese, I may be an American, but we share that common humanity.
So, Pastor, and maybe this is an interesting point to ask, because as Christians, as we involve ourselves in the culture, maybe at times we, denounce and really condemn some of the systems that exist in the society that perpetuate these disparities. But also there are systems, there are things, there are programs that are being put together to support people who are poor that maybe are not even led by believers or led by Christians, that maybe they're not even within our religion or our denomination. But yet these programs are doing something about the poverty in the world. Should we engage in those programs as part of supporting the efforts to alleviate the state of those who are poor?
This statement that I was inspired to say is a reproach to me as well as to you and all of us. Any program that is birthed from a desire to help our fellow man, as Christians, we should seek to see how we could be a part of it. Should I say that over?
Please.
Any program that was birthed from a desire to help our fellow man, we Christians should ask ourselves the question, how can I be a part of this movement? How can I contribute to making this movement successful? And we may do like what others do. That is not by a Christian group. That is not a Christian group that's doing that. No, that's not the issue. It is humans recognizing our shared humanity, seeking to alleviate some of the suffering. And as a child of God, something in you should be stirred to be a part of that.
Yeah, because as Christians, and maybe even we would tend to us to really be committed to the denomination, we can move away and say we want to separate ourselves from these things that deal with the world and define the world as those other people who have not conformed to our set of beliefs, and say we don't want to connect with them. But our linking up and our connection and our engagement and partnership may be the means through which we create real resources to help people who are poor.
That is how it should be. And there are some Christian organizations that have started to do just that. The Seventh Adventist Church has ADRA, the Red Cross. Many other churches have their humanitarian side that they're doing things. I have to confess that many organizations have an ulterior motive. They use their humanitarian work as an umbrella to suck the well dry. So a lot of times when you give money to some of these organizations, and we'll talk more about this as we go on in other episodes, most of the money is spent with administrative expensive rather than actually going towards the work. Meaning it's paying the CEOs their big salary and their big offices and buying dinners for their workers and sending them on vacation, because these are non-profit organizations. So at the end of the year, there should be no money left over, so to speak. So they have to spend that money. Unfortunately, many times they don't spend the money where it should be spent, but upon themselves. So we must recognize too that many of these organizations are really hiding behind charity in order to be like ravenous wolves. But yet, even so, if we could do something to change it, if we could expose corruption, we should do so. But in other cases, we may have to just simply say, look, I may give $10 and only $2 go towards helping the poor. But guess what? That is $2 that they would not have had otherwise. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
So I may be grieved that in giving this $10, 9 isn't going towards helping the poor and the needy, or 8. But instead, 8 is going into the pockets of the organization to do their stuff.
Yeah.
But still, there are $2 that are going out there to do something that would not have done anything otherwise. So sometimes you have to close your eyes, so to speak, recognizing I can't do more. I can't go there myself. I can't do more. So even if it's just $2 of these $10 that's going to go to help, it's $2 that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So in that sense, yes, we should still be willing to give.
Yeah, just maybe to take you back, Pastor, because I sort of took you off course here a little bit. You were really speaking about the individual mandate for us that we each have towards another.
Yes. You're my brother. I'm your brother. What do brothers do to each other? We love each other. We support each other. We help each other. If we could go beyond the race, the culture, the ethnicity, the religion, the political party, and see another human being, a brother or sister, that would be half of the problem solved, maybe even more solved. If I could begin to recognize that we live in a broken world, and in a broken world, it is not equally shared, the brokenness, then I will stop judging those who are unfortunate. Because we had no choice where we were born. The government that was over us, we have no choice. And we live in a system that keeps the poor poor and the rich rich. So this doesn't have to do with me being wicked. There are a lot of times when, to get away from helping, we begin to judge. The Bible says, love, don't judge. Once I begin judging you, I begin to feel superior to you. And then I make my own verdict whether I should help or not. But if you look at scripture, and I know we will get into this more, so I don't want to anticipate too much what we will be doing, we will see God's true attitude towards the poor. And there's no time in the Bible where God blames the poor for their poverty. Even when we see, it just blows my mind. God never blames the poor for being poor, but he chastises the rich for not helping the poor. And even when the poor became poor because of their bad decisions, God still put things in place to reverse that poverty. Now, I wish we could be like that today. Like bankruptcy, that filing bankruptcy was a system by which, if I made certain financial decisions that were not the best, that led me to a point where debt is crushing me, I could do what?
To recover.
Yes, by filing for bankruptcy. That was a system that was put in place to help someone who fell on hard times because of some poor decision made. God is the greatest bankruptcy lawyer in the world in terms of, he says, I put in place a system whereby people can reverse their poverty if they made poor decisions. But God never blames the poor for being poor. And that should be our attitude today. Don't judge. Love and help. Because we live in a broken world.
Then how then within that do you insert this idea that, if you see a man who's looking for fish, don't give him fish, teach him how to fish?
It fits perfectly in. But then it would be cruel for me to teach him to fish without a fishing pole.
And that becomes the means through which now you equip them to be able to lift themselves out of their own state.
So it's not enough for me to tell you, you should go to learn to fish. Let me teach you to fish, but I have no fishing pole. If I had a fishing pole, then you could teach me. So if you're going to be teaching the man to fish, provide him the resources
to then go ahead and actually do that fishing.
Yes. And a lot of times, again, we hide behind these high-sounding platitudes, so to speak, just so that we don't really help. So you go to a church and they have a financial seminar on retirement and all of this kind of stuff, but here's a person who hasn't worked for 4 years.
And maybe that, Pastor, is another interesting point that we mentioned briefly, but maybe speak to it, because proximity becomes a big issue. A lot of us are enclosed and live in these enclaves where we're just interacting with people of the same social status, economic status, and we never quite get to observe the pains and the real effects of poverty and how people are suffering. And even maybe as the Christian community, how do we create those opportunities for us to be exposed to these situations? Because I think that reality in itself can strike something deep within us as we see people suffer.
And that is what we will be touching in future episodes. Like we go along, how can we take this principle of, in as much as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, take it out from the Bible, dress it in street clothes, put some walking shoes on it, and then send it out into the world, meaning us into the world. This is what I'm hoping we will be able to achieve this quarter, so that by the time we are finished, there are going to be a lot of people in this world who will be happier off, who will be better off, because you and I studied this topic in as much as you did it
to the least of these.
To the least of these, my brethren.